friends, and welcome to another chapter of Chapters. We're delighted to be here and let you know that Chapters is the television program that deals with authors, editors, and publishers in Kentucky, Ohio, and West Virginia. And today, we're delighted to have Rajia Hassib with us, and I'm your host, Carter Seaton. Rajia was born and raised in Alexandria, Egypt, before moving to the United States at age 23. A decade later, she returned to college to study English writing and literature and to pursue her lifelong dream of becoming a writer. Since age 7?
Yes.
She holds a BA and an MA in English, both from Marshall University. After graduation, she worked briefly as a part-time instructor of English at Marshall, teaching an introduction to creative writing class as well as a class on post-colonial literature. She lives in Charleston with her husband and 2 children, one of whom's about to take off for college. Her previous novel, In the Language of Miracles, garnered several significant awards, and it looks to me like she's about to repeat all that. Her new novel, A Pure Heart, which is truly wonderful, has gotten rave reviews that are well-deserved on NPR, in Vanity Fair, in the Southern Literary Review, and the Boston Globe, to name a few. It also rated a starred review in the trade publications Kirkus and Book List, and was called one of the best books of 2019 by Real Simple. All those accolades are just so well-deserved. I love this book. It's magnificent. So your head must be spinning. Congratulations on another wonderful achievement.
Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about the storyline before I start asking you a couple of, more specific questions.
Sure. The novel deals with 2 sisters, Rose and Gamila, who are both Egyptian, but Rose is an Egyptologist who is married to an American journalist and lives in New York. She works at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And her sister, Gamila, gets killed in a suicide bombing in Egypt. So we learned that from the very beginning of the novel. Rose then goes back to Egypt to spend some time with her parents, and while she's there, she decides to collect some of Gamila's things in order to find out what happened to her. So as the novel unfolds, we find out as well what happened to Gamila, what led her to be at the site of the suicide bombing, and we also deal with Rose herself and her relationship with her husband, who we find out is also somehow involved with the whole tragedy. So,
in a way, it's a mystery because you don't really understand all of that until you get all through the woven together parts. It's wonderful the way you've revealed it.
Thank you.
What inspired you to set your book there at the aftermath of the Arab Spring?
It's a very interesting moment in time. It's a fraught moment in history. The main thing that drew me to it was that it really exemplifies the effects of the political on the personal. Egypt had been fairly, I don't want to say stable, but monotonous for 30 years before that. It had one president for 30 years, so people didn't get to deal with politics as often in their daily lives. And then the revolution happened, and the upheaval that followed with the Arab Spring, and people became very galvanized in their political opinions, and it affected them, and it affected their relationships with family members and friends. And that was happening at the same time as we here had the years leading up to the 2016 elections, and that also political kind of atmosphere that was also very polarized.
Chose sides.
Yes, they chose sides, and they chose them very, very passionately, and they fought with each other and with friends and family members. So I had that same thing. I was watching the same scenario unfold both in Egypt and here, which is interesting to me because people don't really think of the 2 countries as similar in any way. But one of the things that immigrants see is the similarities. So I was interested in exploring that, and also because I'm a Muslim and I've been living in the U.S. for 20 years, and I had wanted to address terrorism directly. That moment in history after the Arab Spring was unfortunately one where terrorist attacks were happening in Egypt, and so it made it also a good time to set this novel in.
Yeah. Why did you choose to use that newspaper account of the suicide bombing as the very first thing that hits us when we open the book?
That's a good question. It's a technical question. I wrote an entire draft where I didn't reveal what happened until the very end, and it didn't read right to me. It read too much like a mystery slash thriller than what I wanted it to be. So I decided that, and I had read other novels, similar novels before that, and one of them was The Association of Small Bombs by Karan Maharajan, and his novel starts with the bombing as well, and it's a totally different novel. But if you look at that, if you look at a novel like Celeste Ng's Everything I Never Told You, for example, it starts with the first line, "Lydia is dead." I had read multiple novels where they revealed the ending in the beginning, and then the journey becomes not necessarily trying to find out what happened, but trying to find out how it happens and why, which was just something that was more kind of appealing to me, and it fit more with what I was trying to do. So I rewrote it and started with the newspaper account just to get that out of the way, so on page one, this is what happened. And now we have to find out how it did.
I see, I understand. In this book, you really explore beyond the things you've just talked about, family dynamics, the culture of Egypt, religion, all of those things. Were those foremost in your mind when you started the book to see if you could weave all those kinds of themes together?
Not necessarily, no. I didn't intentionally set out trying to cover them, but because I like, the only way I know how to write is to write character-driven fiction, and I'm very interested in why people behave the way they behave. And if you just start exploring that and getting that into account and trying to really express it in fiction, that automatically opens up the door to all these other themes like family dynamics and like people's relationships and how they feel towards those closest to them, and how those feelings are often very complex and sometimes contradicting and not clear cut. And it just makes for more interesting characters and gives me a chance to do what I like to do, which is play with all of that.
Okay, so Barbara Kingsolver says that what she does is she's got some topic in mind that she wants to illuminate, and then she figures out a story to go around that. Like, for instance, Flight Behavior was about climate change. Is that how you approached doing this? You had those kinds of thoughts to begin with, and then you crafted a story around it?
Partially, yes. I definitely had a specific topic, and that was terrorism. That was how it started. That was how this novel started, even though it's obviously, as you said, it's not the only thing in the novel. It's just one main event in it. So I definitely wanted to start with that. But I also start usually with a scene. Like, I can see a scene happening. And in that case, it was, and I don't want to reveal too much, but it was at the end, like during the climax, where we have two characters and they make eye contact for a moment. And if anyone reads the novel, they will know which scene I'm talking about. And I knew that this scene would be there. And I had to work my way back to the beginning and find out who the people were and what brought them there together, and how this moment came to happen. But that moment never changed.
Yeah, that's interesting. This book has got lots of parallels in it. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, it's the sisters have parallel lives. They both feel guilty for their estrangement, for instance.
Yes.
They've got different relationship with their parents. Talk about a little bit about those various parallels. Even Appalachia and Cairo, the suburbs of the poorer sections of Cairo. I love the way you tied all of those things together.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was intentional. I'm glad you can see it on the page.
Sure.
One of the things, again, as an immigrant, that I see all the time are the similarities. And I thought that
we probably don't see them like you do.
I think you see it. Yeah, you see it a little bit if you travel, for example, but you don't see it, I think, as much until you've really had the chance to be immersed in different cultures. If you spent a long time abroad, I think that's when you kind of start picking up on those similarities. But because I grew up in Egypt and I was born there and I've been living in the US for 2 decades, I think I spent enough time in each culture to just really see that right away. And I wanted to highlight that. So I have these similarities built in intentionally, the parallels, but also some of them are because people behave in very similar ways but sometimes to justify totally different outcomes. So you have, for example, even if you look at Gamila, the sister who dies in a terrorist attack, and then if you look at the terrorist himself, who has a couple of chapters devoted to him, they use almost the same logic to justify totally different things.
They both think that what they do will cause them a pure heart.
Yes, exactly.
Will create it. Yes.
And that's also, if you think about politics, that's also common. People always, almost always, at least to my to what I see, justify their positions on moral grounds, and they think that they are on the right sides, and even though they can be on opposite sides.
Right.
And it's interesting to me. I'm not trying to figure out who is on the right side, but I am very interested in that process and the idea of just trying to find moral ground to justify the actions that perhaps one wants to do anyway, and then just make those actions seem as if they are motivated by morality. So these are some parallels, and the sisters, of course, as well in guilt.
Well, the sisters are very different in a lot of ways, but they both are keeping secrets from their husbands,
Yes.
for one thing.
Yes.
They both feel guilty about that estrangement. One feels that she has been too critical of Rose. Rose feels that somehow it's her fault. It's really, you're right, it is very much the way people act, that, and you've got sisters, of course they would act similarly, but for different reasons.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and it's interesting to play with that because they are so different.
Yes.
So when you
Right.
you go deep enough into their intentions, and that's when you can start revealing the similarities, and they all come to a similar conclusion, which is that maybe being judgmental of others or very self-assured in one's own actions is a product of never having been tested. It's easy to think that we are all so morally righteous when we haven't really been put in a position where we felt the need to lie or to hide something.
Right. Talk a little bit about the parallel with Appalachia in West Virginia. There's one line in here, you've got a character who says, you can tell by the look on his face, the thought of Rose led him to thoughts of home, and suddenly he found himself flooded with nostalgia. And he talks about this guy he knew named Dylan.
Yes.
And the look on his face is so similar to what he'd seen in Egypt.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that.
That's something that I really am interested in pursuing because I've lived in West Virginia for 13 years now. And that's another aspect of people thinking that places are totally different. But then you get to know the people, and you realize that they're all very, very similar. And one of the similarities is, specifically for West Virginia, one of them is the fact that it's always stereotyped in the media all the time, and just as Arabs and Muslims are. Another one is the similarities in poverty in some areas, and the contrast between poverty and wealth. Because one of the things I noticed in Charleston, for example, is that you can be driving down one road and you have these mansions and beautiful homes, and then you make a turn and you have smaller houses and trailers and kind of decrepit parts of the city. And that's kind of the same atmosphere on a much larger scale in Cairo. You have the same contrast between poverty and wealth. So I was interested in that, but also really interested in West Virginians, not as the New Yorkers think they are, or not as they are portrayed in the media all the time, but as they are, as I've known them for 13 years.
Yes.
And I wanted to highlight that as well.
Yeah, that's good. You did a good job of that. Talk a little bit about the butterfly effect. Rose is concerned about the way small actions cause big tsunamis.
Yes.
Talk a little. Do you believe that theory?
I do to a great extent. I don't know if it's universally applicable, but I think I found it very helpful in highlighting the complexity of issues surrounding themes or things that people or the media specifically often just deals with in a very simplistic way, such as terrorist attacks. We think that it's very easy to explain them, to justify them. If you make the mistake, which I don't recommend anyone do, of reading the comments on online online articles
Yes,
about terrorism, and you see the amount of vitriol and hatred directed toward Muslims in general, as if the person writing that just knows why this happened. They know why this person committed this horrible, horrible act and allowed himself to kill innocent people. And it's just a very simplistic way of addressing a very complex issue. And the butterfly effect highlights the fact that this complex issue doesn't just come out of a void. It's not created overnight. It's something that is the result of many, many small adjustments, small decisions that regular people make, and that affect them and affect those around them in ways that they cannot foresee.
Yeah.
So,
Well, in Sabar, for instance, all he really wanted to begin with was just to have pigeons.
yes,
And then he gets put in jail, and then his whole life changes. And that's,
Yes.
one person that he meets. If he'd never met that person, things might not have gone that way.
exactly. And even if you do, like I did some research on the mind of terrorists, specifically people who commit terrorist acts in the name of religion, of any religion, and there are very complex issues underlying that, including alienation and humiliation. So there are things that have to happen to a person, or can happen to a person, that can lead to this kind of violence. And I thought it's just never that simple. It's never
Yeah,
as simple as
right.
people think.
Talk a little bit about the relationship between Rose and Mark.
That's a very interesting
And
relationship.
compare
it
it, in a sense, compare it to Gamila and her
yeah.
husband.
And her husband. I love Rose and Mark's relationship because because she's Egyptian and he's American, but they're both enamored with each other's cultures in a very interesting way. And Mark, because he was a foreign correspondent and he lived in Egypt and in the Middle East for years, and he's a West Virginian who has been to other places, and even as a West Virginian originally living in New York, he almost mirrors Rose's immigrant experience. So
That's a big,
Yeah.
that's a culture shock.
It is a culture shock as well, exactly. But I like that because they both have the ability to see both cultures, partly as someone who belongs to them and partly as an outsider as well. And I liked to play with that, and I like how that infuses their relationship with a connection that they may not have had with other people, because they both have this shared experience of being an outsider in a place that they like. So that's one aspect of their relationship that I really like. And I also like the way religion plays into their different attitudes as well. So I thought I'd just like to play with that, and with how that got complicated by Mark's involvement in the terrorist attack.
Right. And then there's Gamila and her husband.
Their relationship is also interesting and is different. He's like, as we find out, he's much older, and he has. And I don't want to reveal too much, but
Right.
the one thing I like most about him is that the culture in Egypt has very different, or at least the culture I was portraying, which is upper middle class Egyptians living in Cairo, have different standards that they can apply to people, and how he is seen as less than the American husband, than Mark, and what that says about people's reactions to others, and where people see themselves in relationship to others and those who are different from them. But I also like that relationship because of how much it tested Gamila, because Gamila is the very religious and pious one until she is tested. So I like that.
What were you trying to say about her relationship, Gamila's, with Mark, in that she was willing to take off her headscarf around him?
And I was trying, actually, that's a very interesting and kind of good point, and a change in their relationship, because initially she never did.
Right.
And during the years when he was engaged to Rose, technically Gamila is covered up. She wears a head cover. She would never be allowed to take it off in front of him. by the time we get to the point where she does that and it surprises him, I think that also parallels her relationship with her husband and where she was at this point, and how that had made her a little bit more flexible in the way she sees religion and the way she applies the rules. So she is, what it tells us is that on one hand she is starting to bend the rules a little bit.
Yes,
She's
I
starting to
noticed
see
that,
them
yeah.
as in a way that is not as strict as she used to. But it also signals, I think, a point in of a new intimacy between her and her brother-in-law, whom you know she's starting to see as a brother more,
Right.
which I also thought was
Right.
was nice.
Yeah, I noticed that there are many times where she does sort of justify bending the rules.
Yes.
It's like, well, this is not really that bad.
Yes.
Surely I won't, it won't damage my pure heart that I'm
Yes.
trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a dynamic that I've seen in many people who become very religious, and it almost like my experience, at least I've seen it, is they peak at some point, and then when they get to a better understanding of religion, they actually become a little bit less strict, or at least that's what I've noticed, because it's that initial kind of excitement and devotion
Emotion.
and the emotional aspect of it that sometimes makes people become very, very strict. But then with time, they start to see that religion is about much more than that. And they start to relax in the superficial, at least, aspect of it a little bit more.
And those little rules really are not the crux of the religion.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But they're not.
That's interesting, yeah. So, what else about this book that would you want to reveal without revealing the whole story, because you don't want to do that?
Yes, it's difficult because it is structured in a way that I
Yes.
hope will keep people reading, so I don't want to
Right.
reveal everything. But I do want people to notice, I hope when they read it, they can notice the similarities. I hope they can notice one thing that I'm very interested in, which is the people's thought process and the logic and the logical fallacies they kind of fall into when they want to do something. And to understand that there is a difference between an act that is driven by a personal desire and then justified by an ideology or a religion, and between just following a religion, which at the end of the day, all religions are peaceful. All religions, there isn't a single religion that really encourages people to go out and kill each other,
Right.
but there are people who would use
Yes.
religion
Right.
to justify whatever ends they
Right.
want to. But it's also, I like I had fun writing this novel. I had fun with the ancient Egyptian mythology. So I hope people.
Yeah, that's another aspect of it, that her studies with Egyptology.
Yes.
They gave you the opportunity to really talk about more the culture and the background and the history of Egypt.
Yes, and it gave me the opportunity to learn about it more, because it's interesting. I grew up in Egypt, and I had only been to the pyramids once in 10th grade, on a school trip, because you had to, and then once again when I wanted to take my own kids there. So it's like growing up in New York and never actually visiting the Empire State
Yeah,
Building,
right.
because it's
Yeah,
right
right.
there,
Right.
So I didn't. There's a lot of stuff that I didn't know about ancient Egyptian history and culture and mythology, and I found that very interesting to delve into and to use as themes and to use as metaphors throughout the novel.
That's good. How many drafts did you write?
I wrote 4 plus kind of revisions within each draft. So I know when I finished this the novel, I tried to go back and kind of count how many pages I threw away, and I came to at least 720 something pages that I discarded, that never made it to the final draft. Never.
Wow.
220 something thousand words, I think. They're gone. I mean, they're on my laptop somewhere.
Of course, right.
But they're never going to be used again. So, and that has to do with the way I write, which I just need to try to tell the story once before I figure out what the story is that I'm trying to tell. I hope I can learn a more productive and less time-consuming
Was
writing.
what you threw away mostly backstory?
No, it was like different incarnations of that novel.
Ah.
Some of it was backstory. Some of it I had half a novel dedicated to Rose's husband, Gamila's husband, and his mom. I had a version where I had his mom's diary in there. So a lot of it is backstory that still feeds into
Yes,
this, even
right.
though it's not
Yeah.
there. But a lot of it was just different approaches to the same story and trying to tell the same story in different ways.
Wow. That's pretty interesting. So the book has just come out this month, actually.
Yes.
Do you have a full speaking tour planned for the fall?
And I do kind of. I've been
Yeah.
fortunate enough to get invited to different places. So I'm going to be going to different states and different
Tell
universities.
our audience
to-
so that maybe if anybody happens to be
Yes,
in that area, they'll be able to see you.
Of course, it's actually I'm trying to update it on my website as well. So if anyone, there's an events page on my website now that has the dates and
And your website is?
RajiaHassib.com. So myname.com. But I'm going to Winston-Salem in September for the Bookmarks Book Festival, which I'm very excited about. Many wonderful writers will be there as well, so that's definitely, if you're in the area, check that out. I'm reading at Marshall University in September. I just found out I'm going to be in Boise, Idaho in October, at Ohio University's Southern Campus in October as well, end of October. I'm going to be in Massachusetts, in Boston in November, so, many interesting readings in DC, in Washington, D.C., August 29th, just, next week. So
That's
so,
wonderful. That's great. Are you working on something else, or are you just giving yourself a break?
I'm starting to think about something else. I'm trying to approach it differently this time and not write it until I know what I'm trying to say. That way, maybe I can get away with 3 drafts instead of 4.
So you didn't do that with this one.
I didn't. I
dove
jumped
in?
straight into it. Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm more of a plotter, so congratulations on doing it that way.
Thank you. Well,
That's great.
I'm hoping to learn to plot a little bit more.
Yes, right. Well, sometimes you have to, make adjustments.
Yes.
That's always a good thing. Rajia, thank you so much for spending some time with us. It's just been wonderful, and I know all of our viewers will be ready to rush right out and get your book.
Thank you for
called
having
Pure
me.
Heart, and it will be available. It's available here at the Inner Geek, and I'm sure it's on Amazon
Yes.
and all the places that you like to go buy your books. We want to thank the Inner Geek for providing our support for on-site support and assistance, and encourage you to come down here and pick up one of Rajia's books. Both of her books, I'm sure, are here. The other one, In the Language of Miracles, came out 2 years ago?
And 4 years ago, actually.
4 years ago.
2015.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it took you 4 more years to write those
Yes, it did.
200 and some
It did.
thousand words, right? And if you would like to reach out to our program to ask questions, there are plenty of opportunities to do that through our Facebook page called Chapters. Those are all going to be listed here on the show, the program here in just a minute, and we look forward to seeing you all again at another episode. Thank you so much, and thank you again, Rajia.
Thank you for
We're
having me.
delighted to have had you.
Thank you.
Connect with Chapters via email. Write to lp4@zoom.email. Chapters has a Facebook page at Armstrong Chapters. Like, subscribe, and follow. All chapter episodes are available on YouTube. Visit Armstrong's YouTube channel, follow Armstrong, and look for a playlist of all the Chapters programs.